John went for an early morning walk in the woods near his cabin. As the cool air caressed his skin, he suddenly froze. He heard a sharp howl echoing from deep in the forest. Out of curiosity and worry, he put down his camping equipment, then cautiously walked in the direction of the sound. As he peered carefully through the undergrowth, his eyes caught sight of a huge timber wolf. The she-wolf was struggling with its front paw caught in a trap, but from time to time it gave up and collapsed to the ground as if it had exhausted its strength. John felt a pang of sadness. The animal's labored breathing clearly showed its despair. He wanted to help, but he knew it was dangerous to get too close to a wild animal. When he took a few steps, the she-wolf growled and fluffed her fur, but John sensed that it was more a reaction of fear than anger. At that moment, he realized a detail that made him feel even more compassionate. The wolf was a mother, and her milk-filled udders proved that her cubs were waiting for her somewhere. If the mother wolf could not hold out any longer, the cubs had no chance of survival. But first, he had to free her from this deadly trap. John carefully examined the she-wolf's leg. There was a deep wound, and the blood loss was severe. He had to open the trap without harming her. Carefully, he touched the paw. The animal did not react. It was unconscious. This gave John the opportunity to act. While holding its head still with one hand, he tried to unlock the trap with the other. But the mechanism was jammed. He couldn't waste time. He picked up a nearby stone and began to strike the lock. Finally, the trap opened and the she-wolf was free. John hoists the exhausted animal onto his shoulder. Although the journey was short, the heavy load and difficult conditions meant it took him almost an hour to reach the hut. He laid her down next to the fireplace, trying to maintain her body temperature. Then, using her medical knowledge, she cleaned and dressed his wounds. Fortunately, his leg was not broken, but any longer, and the situation would have been irreversible. As the days passed, the she-wolf slowly began to recover. When she growled for the first time, John was hopeful that she would recover. But he was still cautious. Before the wolf was fully recovered, he had to go in search of his cubs. The cubs had to be close to their mother, because they couldn't stray too far from her. Relying on his tracking skills, John searched the forest carefully. Eventually, he spotted a hole hidden in the ground. He knew it would be risky to go in, but he had no choice but to find the cubs. He imitated a wolf howl several times, but there was no movement. Just as he was getting ready to turn back, a tiny wolf cub came out, exhausted from hunger. He was followed by his 3 siblings. John carefully placed them all in a bag for safe transport, but he had to know if there were any other pups in the den. Taking all the risks, he crawled into the cave and breathed a sigh of relief when he realized there were no other cubs inside. Now he could reunite them with their mother. When he got back to the hut, the she-wolf started to howl when she heard the thin whimpers coming from inside the bag. When John put the pups down, the little wolves quickly ran to their mother. John held his breath for a moment. Would the mother accept them? But the she-wolf sniffed her cubs and began to lick them. At that moment, John's eyes filled with tears. Mother and cubs were together again. In the days that followed, John provided food and water for the wolves every day. The she-wolf accepted the meat, albeit cautiously. But days later, something unexpected happened. One day John went outside and saw a pack of wolves gathered outside his cabin. They must have been the she-wolf's family. The pack had come to check on her and her cubs. The big wolves fluffed up their fur and looked menacingly at John. Instinctively, he was scared, but just then, the she-wolf barked loudly. When she barked, the whole pack suddenly calmed down. It was as if the she-wolf had explained that John had done them no harm. After a few more days, the she-wolf began to grow stronger. One morning, she let out a howl, a call to her cubs, and one by one they all followed her. John watched them go in silence. He didn't know if they would return, but he knew one thing. Those 4 tiny wolves and their mother owed him their lives. You can subscribe to our channel and support our animal friends.